over 700 would-be migrants clash with border police.
Deterrence policy that leads to dangerous crossings that leads ultimately to death.
ICE arrested 150 people in Los Angeles and surrounding counties. Most were from Mexico.
One of the thousands of migrants and refugees in the war-torn Middle East and Africa.
Build that wall!
Hello, I'm Barbara Serra, and you're watching a special edition of The Listening Post. Rising migration and the political responses to it have been defining features of the past decade. Stories of refugees, tightening border controls, political battles over immigration policy have all been in the headlines. With conflicts ongoing around the world, the impact of climate change deepening and the fallout from the global financial crisis still lingering, the pressures driving people to move are only becoming greater. In this episode, we are shining a spotlight on the role that journalism has played in shaping what the public and policymakers know about migration. We will be interviewing the filmmaker Matthew Cassell, who has reported on migrant flows around the world. We'll be looking at a genre of reality TV filmed at borders and checkpoints. But we're starting the show with a report from the United States. Before President Trump took office, only the best-informed media junkies might have known that ICE stands for the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency. But the Trump administration's hardline immigration policies have changed all that, multiplying the number of ICE arrests in homes and workplaces. However, the role the media play in this particular story goes well beyond just covering it. Over the past year, NGOs and legal advocacy organizations have worked with some media outlets to track cases of enforcement abuse. And they train communities to use their own media tools to document wrongdoing. The Listening Post's Phillips now from Texas on some of the media practices and stories that have come out of those collaborations.
They're known as ICE raids, seemingly indiscriminate, often undercover operations to root out illegal immigrants. And they happen across the US, day in, day out. Like the case of Perla Morales Luna, a mother taken in front of her screaming children on a Southern California street in March 2018. Or Juan Hernandez, a mechanic in Los Angeles, arrested at work in September 2017, even though agents had no probable cause or warrant. Or Romulo Avlica Gonzalez, a father of 4, apprehended in February 2017 while dropping his daughter at school. Just 3 examples of thousands. We know about these 3 because they were caught on camera.
Eyewitness footage has been so crucial in exposing ICE's manipulative tactics. Romulo Avelica Gonzalez was arrested by 2 ICE agents who were in unmarked vehicles wearing jackets that only said police, but there's a reason why they don't identify themselves. They're trying to use manipulative tactics to get information from immigrants or people who they've racially profiled in order to arrest and deport them. This happened in February of 2017, and it was really the first high-profile case that really showed what the human price of ICE's new enforcement looked like.
US Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, is not a new body. Its current incarnation, the largest investigative arm of the Department of Homeland Security, was part of a restructuring effort in the wake of 9/11. And it's not as though the Obama administration didn't deport undocumented workers, as many as 20,000 a month by 2016. But Donald Trump has gone further. During his first week in office, the president signed an executive order that rewrote the rules on who ICE should prioritize in its operations, making virtually every undocumented immigrant in the country, all 10.7 million, fair game for arrest and deportation, whether they had a criminal record or not.
The former director of ICE, Mr. Homan, publicly stated that the days of lack of enforcement of immigration laws are over. They should all be scared.
Earlier, if you're in this country illegally and you committed a crime by entering this country, you should be uncomfortable, you should look over your shoulder, and you need to be worried.
Then ICE did something which last 2 administrations had not done. They actually rescinded every single prosecutorial discretion memo dating back till 1973. And apprehending and deporting anyone who comes to your attention became the new policy.
What that's translated to on the street is Folks who didn't have to anticipate the possibility of being arrested and deported now do. We've seen a substantial increase in interest. A lot of stories about the way immigration enforcement unfolds, arrests across the country, families separated, deportations.
Stories about how ICE racially profiles people on the street, picks up immigrants at routine court check-ins, uses contentious surveillance tactics, and makes mass arrests. Some of the journalism does more. Extensive collaborations between news organizations and advocacy groups that have done the research and can show people a thing or two.
We covered a project that was put together by the Immigrant Defense Project and the Center for Constitutional Rights here in New York City that tracked immigration raids, and it showed a marked increase in operations targeting people with no criminal record. So what we've seen under the Trump administration is a huge increase in arrests. All of these different colors correspond to different types of enforcement activity that was observed. So, like a physical arrest or surveillance or use of force. So we have 128 cases observed here, 48 here.
ICE Watch kind of projects serve traditional accountability journalism. The Marshall Project New York Magazine collaboration was really interesting because it kind of was a mix of the two. It was grounded in the reports of individual immigration enforcement actions and deportations. And in New York in particular, that's fascinating because seeing the mapping of here is what has actually happened is useful to immigrant New Yorkers who can actually turn the ambient buzz of rumors about what might be happening into a sense of what has actually happened and can navigate their own lives accordingly.
Abolish ICE is the collective name given to a growing movement protesting ICE's new mandate and that of its partner agency, Customs and Border Protection, or CBP. The movement was energized by the release of an audio recording back in June 2018, with the sounds of children crying out for their parents. And that has continued ever since, with the president's constant references to the, quote, threat of the migrant caravan.
The criminals, the smugglers, the trespassers marching toward our border, turn back now because you are not getting in.
They are events that have gotten a lot of traction in the mainstream.
She started filming.
And advocacy groups, not just the media, have suggestions on how to tell the story.
FM 100 KTEX.
I'm headed to a series of workshops organized by Witness near McAllen, Texas. It's a city right on the US-Mexican border. Given the spike in immigration enforcement in this particular valley, the group says it's essential to equip people here with the tools and techniques needed to film events as they happen. This program is a crash course in how video can help immigrant communities expose injustices, advocate for asylum seekers, and defend against deportations. It teaches people not just how to document ICE and Border Patrol abuses, but how to do it safely and ethically.
Our trainings focus on digital security, so how to secure the content on your phone, how to secure your communications, your computers, your social media. We also focus on filming tactics. What should you film? What shouldn't you film?
Aprendí que tengo derecho a filmar cuando estoy viendo que está cometiéndose un abuso. Si él me dice que no continúe una filmación, no continuar, pero sí dejar prendido el audio para poder captar, ¿verdad? Si está pasando algo injusto.
And then a really crucial component of our work is helping people think through strategies around what to do after you film. How you save it and how you preserve it can impact whether or not it can be used as evidence in a court case or a legal proceeding.
If I record something, I would just post it online, but like now I know that there's specific procedures that I should take before posting that.
Workshops like this one are having a real impact on local communities. But the power of citizen video is going well beyond.
Having video footage, having kind of a first-person document is often the difference between something being a local story, if that, and a national story. We've seen in several cases things that were initially posted as Facebook videos becoming things that, national outlets have said in their newsroom, gee, this is getting a lot of play on social media, maybe we should write it up.
A video showing an illegal immigrant being
ICE
arrested.
agents grab her off the street and try to force her
This
into their
recent
van.
arrest, which is getting a lot of attention.
The new technology has become extremely important in your legal defense. For ICE, an unauthorized immigrant is a lawbreaker. For the advocates of that unauthorized person, he or she is not just a lawbreaker, which is true, but he or she is also a parent, he or she is also a contributing member of the community, he or she is also someone who has roots in this place. They want to portray that aspect of the person, and these tools have become very important in making that happen.
Remember Juan Hernandez, the mechanic in LA arrested at work? The entire incident was captured on the shop's surveillance cameras, footage that was used by his defense in court. And that video taken by Romulo Avlica Gonzalez's daughter on her cell phone, that footage went viral, helping him out of immigrant detention 6 months later. Breaking the ice, one video at a time.
Around the world, migrants and refugees are on the move, and to a large extent, journalists and aid agencies are the main, sometimes only, sources of information on these migrant flows. Matthew Cassell is a journalist and filmmaker who's been on this beat for more than a decade. He's tracked refugees escaping from wars, the treatment of migrants at borders across Europe, and the lives of those left behind when loved ones leave. Well, Matthew Cassell joins us now from Chicago. Matthew, thank you for joining us here on The Listening Post, and welcome. You've spent years focusing on the issue of migrant flows, spent a lot of time working in Europe. Tell us a little bit about the coverage that you've seen and also how you think it's affected both policymakers and the European public.
As you said, I've spent years covering this issue, and I remember during the peak of the global refugee crisis, in September 2015. I remember one day where BBC journalist was at Munich train station in Germany, where train-by-train refugees were getting off. And it was a big story. Every global news agency was out there and news channel was out there covering it. And I remember the BBC journalist was trying to find people to speak with.
How do you feel?
But she couldn't find anyone who spoke English. And I don't mean to single out the BBC or that journalist in particular. But with the coverage of that time, there were very few journalists who actually spoke Arabic, who spoke Dari, who spoke the language of the refugees and migrants who were coming to Europe. And what that meant is that we weren't able to hear from the refugees and migrants in their own languages. And it wasn't just BBC. Al Jazeera English also had teams out there who didn't speak any of the languages. And also editors and news outlets were contacting me and trying to commission stories focused only on English-speaking refugees and migrants at that time. Months after that, people like Nigel Farage and other anti-immigrant or anti-refugee voices in Europe and the United States were able to stand in front of pictures of masses of migrants and refugees crossing into Europe and use language like an invasion or a breaking point. The fact that we hadn't heard from so many of those people and they just remained these nameless, storyless people in the months leading up to that, it wasn't the only reason that let him do that, but it definitely contributed to it. We should have heard more from the refugees and migrants in their own voices.
I guess if we had heard more directly from a lot of the refugees and migrants, perhaps we would have known more about the reasons behind their migration. Do you think that that's a point that is seldom made, as in we show pictures of the refugees and migrants arriving, but perhaps not explain enough about why, and they all have different reasons, why they undertook the journey?
A lot of the people who were coming to Europe, who have been coming to Europe in recent years, are from countries like Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, Syria. These are all countries that many of our governments have been directly involved in, having troops on the ground or selling these governments or different actors in those countries weapons so that they can fight against each other. I think it's important to understand the root causes, and I think it's been lacking. Part of the reason, definitely, is that it takes a lot of time and resources to, travel to West Africa or to Afghanistan or to South Asia and kind of explore the root causes. And for the past few years, unfortunately, especially in the English language media, the coverage has been dominated by Brexit and by Donald Trump. And there's been very little coverage that really gets in depth at any other issue, be it the migration crisis, climate change, ongoing conflict in Syria, and that's unfortunate.
Your latest series is called The Missing, and in it you made a decision not to focus on the people that migrated, but focusing on their communities, the families left behind. Why did you decide to do that, and how important do you think it is to do that if we are going to see, I guess, a complete overview of the migration crisis?
My father just passed away last month, so I'm very aware of the pain that comes with, the death of a loved one. I cannot begin to imagine what it's like for people who have had loved ones and relatives disappear for years without knowing whether or not they're dead or alive. But sadly, that is a reality for thousands of people around the world who do not know the status, who do not know if their loved ones are, alive or dead, living in a foreign country or not. And that's why I think it was very important to tell those stories. These are the people who have been hardest affected by this issue. And I think just in general, we could all benefit from having a little bit more understanding, a little bit more compassion injected into this debate and coverage of refugees and migrants, because it's sorely been lacking in so much of the global media. And that's what I was trying to do in the series, The Missing.
Matthew Cassell, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and experience with us here on The Listening Post. Thank you.
Thank you.
They are images seen on screen more and more often. Border control officials searching for illegal goods, interrogating and deporting those deemed undesirable, all in the name of protecting the homeland. And those pictures don't just end up on newscasts. No, border security shows are now a subgenre of reality TV. Producers say the programs provide an insight into the essential work of customs and immigration agencies. But in the post-9/11 climate and in the context of a global refugee surge, the format smacks of tabloid TV at its worst, often exaggerating and sensationalizing the threats posed by those crossing the border. For governments with law and order policies to sell, these shows are like paid political advertising without the paid part. For broadcasters, it's TV made on the cheap. Never mind that those tuning in at home might be left with a distorted view of what really happens at their nation's borders. The Listening Post's Johanna Hoos reports now on the dangers of border security TV.
Border Force, America's gatekeepers.
These are the gatekeepers of the most talked about border in the world.
Border Security, Australia's front line.
Immigration detains a busload of illegal workers.
Border Patrol New Zealand.
Immigration screen and profile for undesirable and unsuitable arrivals.
Just some of the Border Security TV shows on air over the past year.
We're in a time where immigration is increasingly part of popular discourse, and anti-immigration discourse is increasingly part of popular culture. So the idea that we need to shut down our borders, that quote-unquote illegal immigration is changing our culture and our demographics. And so border security shows really appeal to people's desires to control borders.
These shows don't exist in a vacuum. And I think you just need to look at the sort of language that's used around immigration. Certainly in the Australian example, the show is called Border Force, Australia's front line. I mean, front line is a militaristic term. It's something you associate with war and with conflict, and I think that really sets the tone for what we're talking about.
The format is simple, and it's cheap. Crews get behind the scenes, accompanying border security as they search for illegal goods, interrogate the suspicious, and deport the unwanted.
And CBSA officers want to know who's coming to play and who's coming to stay.
Border crossings and airport service filming locations, while shows like Australia's Frontline or Border Patrol New Zealand also feature raids on migrant workers or visa overstayers, those who've already made it into the country.
At an early morning roadside operation, immigration suspect they have caught this Indonesian man working illegally.
Japan's recently premiered Taikyo no Shunkan, or Caught at the Moment of Deportation, ramped up that drama. It follows a group of immigration officers in their hunt for so-called illegal aliens.
The broadcast has faced a lot of critique for its lack of balance and for turning the perils of immigration into entertainment.
One of the problems with programs like Caught at the moment of deportation is that there's no journalistic rigor. It looks journalistic because you're with the officers with your camera, so you as the viewer can feel you can judge what's happening, but we don't actually talk to the other side.
おはようございます。入国管理局です。身分証明書出して。出して。パスポート。
In one segment, Tokyo immigration officers stake out an apartment building. The police officers enter the apartment and they find 3 Vietnamese guest workers. They interrogate them on camera, and then the next day they are deported. We tend to think that they're guilty, but there's been no due process. It seems like mission accomplished. Good job, police.
The shows do make good TV, but in order to do that, they need to sensationalise and exaggerate the idea of a threat at our borders.
New Zealand's air, sea and land borders are constantly under attack.
These shows do give the impression that countries are under siege from overwhelming numbers of people seeking to break laws and flout regulations.
That could destroy our economy and our whole way of life.
What they don't show, because it doesn't make good TV, is the tens of thousands, in fact hundreds of thousands of people who pass through borders legitimately every day.
Stuart Morris is the executive producer of Border Force, America's Gatekeepers, a show originally produced for British broadcaster UK TV, but since sold to National Geographic for American audiences. The 10-part series follows the Department of Homeland Security's Customs and Border Protection Agency, CBP, and their operations at the bridges that connect the US and Mexico. Morris calls his show an observational documentary and disputes the idea that border control shows misrepresent the threats posed by those crossing the border.
We're recording things which would happen even if our cameras aren't there. It is truly a kind of a fly-on-the-wall obs doc series, watching from the point of view of Customs and Border Protection officers.
Lately there's been a trend on people trying to smuggle narcotics on this type of bottles.
One of the problems that we had is that we had a small crew covering 28 bridges. There was a drug bust on a daily basis, but some of them happened 300 miles from where we were at that time and we couldn't film it. If we had a crew in every bridge, we would show the true extent of the problems that officers face. So I think we kind of got a really fair reflection of what they do and how they operate.
For critics, the issues go beyond the narratives that these shows create, such as casting border security officials as the good guys. The program Border Security Canada's Front Line is a textbook case of that syndrome, or at least it was. According to a study conducted by a group that campaigned for the cancellation of the show, in most episodes, more suspects were deemed guilty based on the color of their skin. And producers turned the migrants involved into unwitting actors. One migrant worker, Oscar Mata Duran, sued the program in 2013 for breach of privacy. Duran's workplace was raided by the Border Security Agency and his deportation was filmed and prepared for broadcast. But Duran won his case. In 2016, the show was cancelled and the episode never went to air.
During the course of that raid, we got calls from family members to say, help us get our family members out of detention. And during the course of that conversation, a number of family members said there was massive film crews. And through that, we realized that, basically Canada Border Security was trying to film a very sensationalist raid. And during the course of talking to the men who were in detention, we found out that Oscar Mata Duran, as well as a number of other workers, signed consent forms to be on this TV show. And this generated a massive campaign against the TV show on the basis that people's privacy rights were being violated, that people were not able to give informed consent, that deportation was being used as entertainment.
The criticism of Canada's Front Line went far beyond Oscar Mata Duran's case. The show's production company Force 4 got a helping hand from the government in the form of subsidies, and they agreed to surrender editorial control of the program to the Border Protection Agency. It's the price that the producers paid in exchange for access, and they aren't the only ones to do so.
In the cases of Australia, investigations have uncovered that the Immigration Department, the Department of Border Security, has final sign-off on every single program that goes to air and is able to manipulate the show to its own ends. These are, for all intents and purposes, government propaganda. This is not to suggest that what's happening is not the reality of what's happening, but it is a prejudiced and distorted view of that reality.
The authorities in Australia had a little bit too much control, and I think that's unfortunate, especially if other shows are tarnished with that. I mean, we signed a multimedia agreement with Homeland Security, which is very non-restrictive. They have no editorial control over what we put out, but I think what they get out of it is they inform the public through a process which is accessible. And, you know, members of the public aren't going to watch some corporate video about, you know, CBP, but they might actually watch a show about the Southwest border and the work that CBP does, told in a kind of independent way by independent producers.
It's essentially free PR in prime time. And it's syndicated into reruns, so it's great. I mean, you invest a little bit of time by allowing a camera crew to accompany, and you've got an hour-long commercial for the great things your government's doing.
Commercial in more ways than one. A free advert for the agencies being profiled, a TV hit that's affordable for those producing it. But what about the bits that don't make the cut? The crucial backstories of the lives ruined that just don't make for good television. Perhaps, at a time of unprecedented displacement, audiences should be more discriminating over border-controlled TV, programming that clearly crosses the line.
And that's it for our special episode on the media coverage of the migration story. We'll see you next time, right here at The Listening Post.